So which data types are available for you to use? Well, there are numbers, which are just used, and of course, not just positive non-decimal numbers, but also negative numbers like -3, or numbers with decimal places like 22.956. And important here, numbers with decimal places, so like 22.956, are called floats or floating point numbers. Numbers without decimal places, like here 2 or -3, are called integers. Now, you of course use numbers for any code where you need to calculate something or where you just need to work with a number. And of course, typically that's a lot of code. Whether you're having a calculator like we're writing it, or you're working with some prices or something like that, you would typically work with numbers, of course. Now, you don't just have numbers in code, however, sometimes you also need text. Let's say you're working with the name of a user who logged in, or you want to show a message to the user. Then you're working with text, or also called strings. And it's not just called strings in JavaScript, but in other programming languages as well. So if I say a string, I mean a text type. Now, you can actually create a string by wrapping your text between single quotes, double quotes, or these backticks here, which you find on your keyboard. All three creates a valid string. You can use whatever you want, you just should be consistent, though the third option here, the backticks, that's kind of special. I'll come back to what's special here later. For the moment, use either single quotes or double quotes. And then again, be consistent and always use that. So that would be important for outputting results, for gathering user input, for showing messages, things like that. Now we can see both types in action here in our program. We got a number here, we got a bunch of numbers here, and this thing here, this actually is a string. It just happens to be an empty string. Now with empty string, I mean that this is just an opening and closing single quote, and I could have used double quotes as I mentioned, but there's nothing in between. Because this output result thing here actually is responsible for writing to two places in my web page, and for now I'm only interested in writing to this place here and output my number. I'm not interested in writing to the other place, and therefore I tell it to write nothing to that other place. Now we could actually write our log here to the other place, and that could be done by creating a new variable, let's say calculation description, and you can use any name you want here. I just try to describe what I'll store in this variable, and what I will store here is a description of the calculation we just ran. And that would be that we had 0 plus 10 in quotes times 3 divided by 2 minus 1. Now the important thing here is this is now not a mathematical equation which will be executed by JavaScript. This is treated as text, and therefore JavaScript won't even try to execute it in a mathematical way. Instead, we can now pass calculation description to this output result thing, so I'm referring to this description here. And what will now happen is that you see this text here once you reload this page. Again, this is just the text I just entered. It looks like some mathematical equation which should be executed, but since I'm not using numbers here, but I'm wrapping this in quotes, I'm telling JavaScript, this is some static text. Don't touch it, don't try to execute it, take it as text. I could be saying hi there in here as well. If I would do that, then we would see hi there here. But of course, I just want to, in this case, in this application, log my calculation, which I effectively have up there. And therefore, this is what I use here. If I would use current result in here, JavaScript also wouldn't try to look into this variable. Instead, it would take this as part of the string. And hence, if I now reload, it would say, well, this here. It would not give us the value which is inside of current result. Instead, it would just take this as some text which it should output. If you would want to use the value here, you would have to do something which is called string concatenation, which is you build a string from multiple substrings. So here we could say this opening bracket, the opening parentheses here, that's in a string. Then with the plus operator, we add current result, now not between quotes, but just like this, and therefore JavaScript will now go ahead and look into this variable. And then I will concatenate this string. So now again, between quotes is this string. The pluses here are also not between quotes because I don't want to treat the plus operators here as strings, but instead as normal operators. Now we used plus before with numbers. JavaScript actually can also work with plus if you're using it with strings. Then it will not try to use plus in a mathematical way. Instead, it will just combine multiple strings, so multiple text pieces, to a longer text piece. And that's what's happening here. We're combining this parentheses with the actual value that lives in current result, and then with this part here to a longer string. And actually here, you should add some white space so that in the final text which is created, you have some empty space between the plus and the value that's stored in current result.